Remember Knack? It was the very first game shown running on PlayStation 4 hardware back in 2013, and its director Mark Cerny also took the role as lead architect on the console itself. As such, the original Knack should have been a technical showpiece for the new machine. In the end, however, that didn't exactly come to pass, and many believe the tale of Knack to be finished, which is why it's difficult to imagine a sequel less expected than Knack 2. But alas, here we are. Knack is indeed back, and this new game presents an interesting opportunity for Mark Cerny and his team. Without the pressure of a system launch to contend with, then, Knack 2 might just be the redemption its developer has needed. Many things have changed since Knack was first launched, however, chief among those being the introduction of the PlayStation 4 Pro, which means that Knack now has a much larger pool to play around in. As you would expect then, what with the ties to Mark Cerny himself, Knack 2 does indeed take full advantage of the PS4 Pro and does so better than most other games on the market. This primarily comes in the form of choice. Knack 2 offers players several options in how they want to experience the game. You have 2 resolution choices, multiple frame rate options, and even support for HDR. So what does this mean for the players then? Well, by default, Knack 2 selects the high resolution mode, which sees the game rendering at 3200 by 1800 using checkerboard rendering to get there. Seeing as checkerboarding is a crucial feature of the PS4 Pro, which Mark rightfully touted, it should come as no surprise that Knack 2 would make use of it. While not quite native 4K, the resulting image quality is quite sharp and clean to behold, working well with the type of scenery on display in Knack 2. Then there's the high frame rate mode, which drops the resolution back down to 1080p in order to maximize performance. We'll touch on the actual performance differences shortly, but even using this mode, image quality is still great, thanks to the addition of a new temporal anti-aliasing feature. For owners of 1080p displays, it is possible to access both modes, and yes, that does mean that downscaling from the high resolution mode to 1080p is possible. It looks excellent here. For owners of the PS4 Amateur though, things are pretty much exactly as you'd expect, meaning that it runs at 1080p, just like the high frame rate mode on the PS4 Pro, and indeed the original Knack itself. But that doesn't mean that the two are identical. At a glance it might seem that way, but there are subtle changes evident if you look closer. And this applies to both the high res and high frame rate modes equally. For one thing, shadow maps are higher resolution on the PS4 Pro versus the base system, as you can see in this shot. If you look very closely at the shadow itself, you can see just a little bit of extra detail visible on the PS4 Pro side. We also see a subtle variation in the ambient occlusion implementation here. The contact shadows in these rocks actually appear slightly darker on the PlayStation 4 as opposed to the Pro. Overall though, the visuals on display really are generally equal, and the end result is a great looking game. It really is a huge leap over the original Knack in that regard. There's now a huge amount of variety to the point where the first 3 levels all look and feel entirely unique while evolving from checkpoint to checkpoint. Compared to the repetitive designs of the original game, something likely necessitated by the need to launch alongside the PlayStation 4, Knack 2 feels like a breath of fresh air. We also see full per object motion blur return in full force, which you know I love, along with copious amounts of background geometry in every scene, lots of intricate moving parts, and a great selection of cinematic camera angles that manage to very smoothly frame the gameplay. Say what you will about the design of Knack himself, but the improvements to both the engine and the art direction are hugely welcome here. Heck, the game even makes use of the DualShock 4's internal speaker, a feature that has all but disappeared from most other games now. But the most dramatic improvement of all stems from one major thing: performance. We sharply criticized the original Knack for its uncapped frame rate, which resulted in a wildly unstable experience that simply never felt all that good to play. That all changes with Knack 2. First and foremost, the game now features the option to cap the frame rate at 30 frames per second. It doesn't default to this option, mind you, but for those that value consistency, it's a big win. But if you're playing on the PS4 Pro, you may not even need it at all. You see, unlike the Pro patch created for the original Knack, the sequel's high frame rate mode delivers a near-locked 60 frames per second experience, and it does wonders for the game. Knack 2 is faster and more responsive than ever in this mode, and it looks great during gameplay as a result of the fluidity. It even includes a lot of extra platforming this time compared to the original game, and this extra precision afforded by the faster response is certainly welcome here. Of course, on the flip side, you can see by now that the base PlayStation 4 doesn't quite have what it takes to hang. Unlike the Pro's near locked 60 FPS, the base system spends most of its time in the mid-40s. This is still a mild improvement over the original game, mind you, as that one could drop frequently below 30 FPS, but here, the frame rate remains in the 40s most of the time. It's interesting then that Knack 2 manages to deliver on the promise of the PS4 Pro by offering players the option to hit that desired 60 FPS frame rate. Few other games have managed to pull this off thus far, Deck 13's The Surge being one of the only ones, but it's great to see it here as well. That said, while most of the experience does appear to operate at a relatively locked 60 frames per second, we definitely did run into situations in which the performance could drop below the line. Now, from these results, you can still see that the performance is hugely better than Knack 1, even with the PS4 Pro patch enabled, but still, there is some slowdown that can occur in select situations. So yes, it's not 100% locked, but we are still looking at a relatively stable level of performance across the run of the game, which is why this is my preferred way of playing Knack 2. But how does the PS4 Pro stack up against the PS4 Amateur when using the high resolution mode? This is an interesting one. The primary difference here is of course the jump from 1080p on base to 1800cp on the Pro, and impressively on average the base system is 2 to 4 frames per second faster. This doesn't have a dramatic impact on gameplay of course, since the frame rate is already rather unsteady, but it does give us an idea of how the engine scales. You can see that going from 1080p on base up to 1800cp using checkerboard rendering produces very similar performance results with a slight advantage in favor of the original system. With a 30 FPS cap engaged of course, both would be a locked 30 FPS, but clearly there is a little extra headroom on the base system at the lower resolution. Still, for my money, this mode is nothing more than a benchmark mode. It just doesn't feel great to play when the frame rate is uncapped, and unfortunately, it happens to be the default mode. When you first start up Knack 2, the game opts for 1800cp on the Pro and 1080p on the base system, both with the frame rate unlocked. You can jump right into the options menu to enable a 30 FPS cap, thankfully, but if you want that sweet 60 FPS mode, you have to quit out to the main menu, select the new option, then restart the game. It would have been nice to have it ask the player on first boot, similar to the original Knack when played on a Pro. While we're here, it should also be mentioned that no matter which mode you opt for, the game's cutscenes all render at 30 frames per second. There are still some pre-rendered scenes, but we did run across more real-time sequences this time, including several QuickTime events. It would have been neat to see these running at 60 frames per second of course, but still, 30 FPS locked cutscenes isn't a bad compromise to make, and it works well enough here. Still, in the end, the performance here is exactly what we wanted from the beginning, and it's great to see the team deliver. Those that value frame rate can enjoy Knack 2 at a near locked 60 FPS on the PS4 Pro, while those that prefer image quality at a stable 30 FPS can instead opt for the 1800cp mode, or heck, even 1080p mode on the base system. Lastly, for those that love unstable frame rates, well, there's the unlocked mode there for you. Everyone is catered to here, and that's just great. Though that's not to say everything's perfect here. During one session we ran into this. An unexpected crash bug. Now this type of crash isn't especially common on the PS4, but it was rather surprising to see it in a first-party game, but well, there it is. On a more positive note, Knack 2 includes a rather interesting take on difficulty settings. Compared to the original game, there's a lot more platforming here, but only if you play on normal difficulty and up. So how does that work? Well, while playing you'll notice that some areas are blocked off throughout each stage. These doors open or close depending on the difficulty setting. On easy, for instance, this area will remain open and features very simplistic platforming that anyone should be able to get through. Raise the difficulty though, and this same passage will be closed off, forcing you to take a more difficult route instead with extra platforming. It's simply a neat way to ensure that Knack 2 can be enjoyed by a wider audience without handicapping the more challenging sections for more skilled players. It's a great idea and it works quite well here. Overall then, Knack 2 is an interesting release. It's a game that takes full advantage of just about every feature available on the PS4 line of consoles. You get fantastic PS4 Pro support with multiple selectable options, you get full HDR support across all consoles, And you even get full usage of the controller's built-in speaker. It's also a lot more fun as a game. The internet has had its fun dunking on Knack, and we're guilty of this as well, but Knack 2 really is a much better game all around. The platforming this time is solid and a lot more interesting. The combat is more refined. It takes better advantage of Knack's ability to shift between sizes, and you even get some light puzzle solving. The whole package has come together rather well, and in the end it's a solid little game. Oh, and if you've played the demo that was recently released, don't write the game off just yet. It really feels like they picked about the worst possible section to demonstrate. The arena battles and dimly lit scenery don't exactly entice the players to give the game a shot, and it winds up feeling like more of the same. Or at least more like the werehog from Sonic Unleashed. There are many other better stages than this that would have made for a better demo. Letting players run through the first section of the second chapter, for instance, seems like a better idea. But that's where we're at then. Knack 2 is a better game, a better looking game, and a game with more of the options that players demand. We may not have been looking for a sequel to Knack, but in the end, its existence is a pleasant fun surprise. That's all for now though. If you enjoyed this little video, be sure to give us a like, subscribe to the channel, or follow us over on Twitter. And until next time, this is John signing off.